The air inside Building 702, logistics and supply operations, was thick and static, smelling perpetually of stale coffee grounds, ozone from ancient fluorescent lighting, and the synthetic, faintly chemical odor of recently sealed manila folders. It was the smell of bureaucratic stagnation and low-grade power. Cabrera Chen moved through this haze like a ghost, her movements practiced, minimal, and entirely silent. Her fatigues were regulation, laundered but perpetually faded, evidence of endless wash cycles and the harsh detergents used for utility duty. They hung slightly loose on her lean frame, marked at the knees and elbows by subtle, ingrained stains that no amount of scrubbing could entirely erase. She pushed her service-issue utility cart down the narrow aisle, separating the stacks of bulk requisition forms from the wire cages holding outdated communication equipment. The wheels of the cart were old, slightly warped plastic, and they let out a monotonous, high-pitched squeak hiss with every forward rotation, a sound Chen had long ago stopped registering. It was just part of the low-frequency hum of the base. Her current objective, an insignificant speck in the grand scheme of Camp Pendleton's daily operations, was the replacement of a mop head. The industrial cotton fiber she currently used was past its service life, frayed and useless, barely spreading dirty water instead of absorbing it. She stopped at the counter of the supply NCO, a waist-high barrier of scratched laminate that served as a psychological moat. Behind it sat Sergeant Elmer Morrison. Morrison was a man who had mastered the art of maximizing authority while minimizing effort. His uniform was immaculate, starched creases sharp enough to cut paper, boots gleaming with a mirror shine that suggested less marching and more sitting under his desk. He wore his power like a thick, expensive cologne, heavy and suffocating. Morrison did not look up immediately. He was deeply engrossed in the precise act of highlighting a paragraph in an internal memo about Q3 inventory discrepancies. The yellow marker made a satisfying wet shick sound across the heavy bond paper. Chen waited. Her hands, encased in industrial-grade rubber gloves, rested on the cold steel handle of her cart. She tracked the second hand on the cheap wall clock above Morrison's head. 1 minute. 1 minute and 45 seconds of calculated, deliberate delay. Finally, Morrison sighed, an elaborate performative sound of profound annoyance, and slowly lifted his gaze. His eyes, small and dark, traveled from Chen's face down to her worn boots, settling momentarily on the rank insignia of corporal, the lowest rank capable of commanding any administrative task, and thus the rank most often assigned to the most menial. "Yes, Corporal," Morrison drawled, his voice thick with a patronizing nasal quality. "What vital strategic asset are we disrupting the logistical chain for today?" Chen kept her expression flat, adhering strictly to the base standard operating procedure for supply requests. Requesting one replacement mop head, industrial grade, NSN 4720-01-496-5991. Current issue is frayed, ineffective for maintaining mandated sanitary standards in designated areas. Morrison leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight, a deep, faux leather sound. He steepled his fingers, the manicured nails reflecting the harsh overhead light. "Mop head," he repeated, savoring the banality of the item. "And which designated area requires such priority maintenance?" "Section 702, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. The motor pool staging area and the CO's main administrative hall, Sergeant." Morrison flipped open a large laminated ledger on his desk. He ran a finger down the column, pausing dramatically. "Ah, here we are. Mop heads. Corporal, the Q4 allocation for mop heads was exhausted 3 days ago by the motorized transport unit. Apparently, they spilled large amounts of hydraulic fluid and decided they needed a dozen replacement heads simultaneously." He closed the ledger with a decisive thwack. "Therefore, you are denied." Chen felt the slow, familiar pressure building behind her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was the cold frustration of knowing that every denial of a basic resource meant harder, longer work. She knew definitively that the motorized transport unit had not received a dozen mop heads. Morrison was notorious for rerouting supplies to his personal favorites, or simply denying them out of pure spite, enjoying the friction. "Sergeant," Chen said, her tone meticulously level, "the floor of the CO's hall currently exhibits surface contamination in excess of regulation limits. I can file an emergency requisition, citing health and safety protocols." Morrison chuckled, a dry, rattling sound in his chest. "Oh, go ahead. File away, Corporal. Emergency requisitions take 3 working days just for routing approval. You know the drill. In the meantime, improvise. That's what we do in the military, right? Adapt and overcome." He picked up a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee, taking a slow, noisy sip. He then pointed the rim of the cup toward her, his face set in a smirk of smug superiority. "Look, coffee girl," he said, using the casual dismissive nickname often given to the lowest cleaning personnel. "I'm busy processing real combat logistics, not wiping up spilled juice boxes. Go back to your area. Maybe try turning the old mop head inside out. Be creative." "Dismissed." Chen swallowed, the taste of stale air in her mouth. She stood there for 3 more seconds, the full weight of the insult, the deliberate minimizing of her function, the petty withholding of necessary tools pressing down on her. The rubber soles of her boots squeaked slightly as she finally turned her cart, the squeak hiss of the warped wheels signaling her retreat. Morrison leaned forward, speaking loud enough for the 2 junior clerks shuffling papers in the cubicles nearby to hear. "And CPL. Chen, try to look less like something the cat dragged in. You're supposed to be representing the U.S. Armed Forces, not a third-world laundry service." Chen pushed the cart out of the logistics office, the door closing silently behind her. She did not look back. The weight of the scarred past, 2,000+ words. As Chen navigated the wide, echoing corridor toward the less trafficked administrative wing, her mind, trained long ago to compartmentalize pain and focus on mission parameters, accessed the secure archive she carried not in her hands, but within the deep, shielded recesses of her memory. The insult was a flicker of dust, but it momentarily nudged the monolithic granite slab that covered her past. The nickname, Coffee Girl, grated specifically because it implied fragility and subservience, qualities she had systematically burned out of herself under the oppressive sun of the Helmand province. She traced, without touching, the barely discernible white scar line that ran from her left jawline, disappearing subtly under the collar of her blouse. Most people mistook it for a shaving nick or an old childhood injury. It was neither. It was a precise, jagged signature of the explosion that had redefined her life. The day she earned the Krzyż Waleczny, the Polish Cross of Valor, one of the most difficult foreign combat decorations to acquire, reserved only for acts of extraordinary bravery under direct hostile fire. It was 2018. She wasn't Corporal Chen, the custodian then. She was Specialist Chen, EOD technician, attached to a forward operating base, FOB, hosting a joint coalition force, primarily U.S. Army Special Forces and Polish Grom detachments. The dust in the Jaghori district of Afghanistan wasn't just dirt. It was pulverized rock and dried history, fine as talcum powder, clinging to everything. The air was dry and hot, so thick it felt like trying to breathe soup. Even at 400, the temperature never dropped below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Operation Gryphon's Eye was supposed to be a low-profile sweep, a confirmation of known enemy positions following intercepted chatter. Chen's role was crucial but monotonous, pre-clearing the infiltration route for improvised explosive devices, IEDs. Her team consisted of 4 men: Sergeant First Class Miller, team leader; Specialist Kwan, security marksman; Private First Class Reyes, medic fresh out of TCCC training; and herself. And 3 Grom operators, ghosts in cryptic camouflage, led by Major Janik Kowalski, a man whose eyes held the weary weight of 1,000 lost battles. Chen was wearing the full bomb suit, a protective behemoth that added 85 pounds of Kevlar, ceramic plating and cooling tubes onto her already burdened frame. The cooling unit had failed 3 hours ago, leaving her to sweat through the ordeal. Every movement was a struggle against the suit's inertia. They moved through an old wadi, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on the dried riverbed gravel and the high-pitched whine of her minehound detector sweeping the earth. Sweep, sweep, beep. She heard the soft, insistent tone in her earpiece. Low frequency, metal, deep. She knelt, the helmet restricting her peripheral vision, forcing her to rely on the heavy optics. She used the thin, telescoping prod, pushing gently into the loose soil, 10 inches down. She found it, a pressure plate connected by thin wire to 2 stacked 155mm artillery shells, a mammoth charge designed not just to kill, but to vaporize everything within a 30-meter radius. Miller, visual confirmation. Pressure plate, highly sensitive, triple-stacked ordnance. Estimated yield, high fragmentation, high concussion. Immediate halt. Perimeter secure? She whispered into the comms rig, the sound muffled by the thick helmet. Perimeter secured, Chen. Quan has the high ground. Reyes is holding position 100 meters back. Kowalski is pushing 2 Grom forward to observe. How long for diffuse? Miller's voice was strained, the knowledge of the payload making every breath heavy. 5 minutes to expose the fusing mechanism, 30 minutes for full disarming and rendering safe. Chen began the painstaking process of gently brushing away the dust, using a soft, bristled, non-metallic brush. The sweat poured down her face inside the helmet, stinging her eyes, but she couldn't wipe it. She exposed the plate. It was crude, covered in oil and camouflage paint. The trigger wires, thin and almost invisible, ran into a nearby ancient irrigation ditch. That was when the silence broke. It wasn't the IED. It was a single, high-velocity crack. The sound of an enemy sniper rifle. It echoed viciously off the canyon walls. "Quan down!" Miller's voice exploded in her headset, raw and immediate. "Sniper fire from the 11 o'clock ridge. We're pinned. Chen, you need to pull back." Chen froze, her fingers hovering millimeters above the most sensitive part of the device. If she stood up or moved too quickly, the tremor of the ensuing firefight might trigger the pressure plate. "Negative, Sergeant. I move now. I risk a sympathetic detonation. I have to stabilize the plate." The air erupted into chaos. The distinctive rapid-fire crack-crack-crack of US M4s was answered by the heavier, slower thump-thump-thump of enemy RPK machine guns. Rounds whizzed overhead, kicking up plumes of dust just meters from her position. Chen could hear Reyes screaming, yelling into the comms for Miller to push back so he could reach Quan. But Miller couldn't move. He was using his body as cover for the Grom leader Kowalski, who was attempting to locate the sniper nest. Chen's hands, however, were rock steady. Her mind achieved the terrifying calm reserved only for EOD techs facing certain death. The world narrowed to the wiring, the dust, and the microscopic vibrations running through the ground. She had 3 seconds. The primary threat was the physical shockwave from the firefight. She needed to bypass the pressure mechanism and arm the radio detonator the enemy had surely installed as a secondary kill switch, turning their device against them. She reached for her cutting tools, precision wire strippers made of ceramic. Suddenly, a massive impact shook the ground. Not a bomb. A heavy caliber round, a 50 cal, had struck the stone outcrop directly above Chen's head. Debris rained down, chunks of sharp shale hitting the top of her helmet and the back of the bomb suit. The impact was enough. The pressure plate shifted infinitesimally. A loud, piercing weep, weep, weep went off in her internal comms, the proximity sensor alert. The primary firing circuit was engaged. She had 3 minutes maximum before the chemical timer ran out. "It's live! It's cooking!" Chen shouted, her voice tight but precise. "Miller, everyone, 30 meters back, immediately. I cannot stop the timer." Miller swore violently. "We can't fall back, Chen. They'll flank us. Reyes is pinned. Kowalski, I need 3 minutes to jury-rig a receiver. If I get this, I can command detonate it, but I have to do it by hand before the internal clock finishes." It was a suicidal maneuver. Command detonating a pressure-plated IED meant physically remaining within the blast radius until the very last second, ensuring the signal reached the homemade detonator. The standard EOD SOP was to retreat and use a robot. But the robot had been destroyed by an earlier ambush 2 weeks prior. She ignored the barrage of fire. She ignored the screams of Reyes calling for Quan. Her entire focus was on the minuscule multicolored wires she had exposed, red for power, green for ground, and the delicate exposed copper of the initiator wire. She worked faster than humanly possible, her movements honed by years of training, connecting the remote receiver she pulled from her chest pouch. 2 minutes. Then she heard it, the worst possible sound. Not a gunshot, but the heavy, rushing whoosh of an incoming RPG. "Incoming!" Miller screamed. The rocket struck the wall of the wadi just 20 meters to Chen's right. The blast was deafening, concussive. The sheer force lifted Chen a foot off the ground and slammed her back down. The bomb suit saved her life from the shrapnel and heat, but the internal concussion ripped through her skull. She blacked out for a single critical second. When she came to, the taste of blood was heavy in her mouth. Her nose was bleeding profusely inside the helmet. The internal lights of her comms display flickered wildly. The timer was gone. The bomb was still live, ticking internally. More critically, the blast had caused secondary damage. The wires leading from her radio receiver, the one designed to give her control, were severed. The explosion had also thrown dust and gravel onto the pressure plate, effectively maintaining the pressure. She had 1 minute left. There was no way to defuse it, no way to retreat. Her eyes darted to the Grom leader, Major Kowalski. He was pinned, shielding Miller, 15 meters away. Quan was still out, and Reyes was stuck behind a low pile of rubble, desperately trying to apply a tourniquet to his own leg, which had been hit by shrapnel from the RPG. If the IED went off, it would wipe out the entire forward element, and Reyes would be vaporized. Chen reached an instantaneous decision, a calculation of maximum effectiveness for maximum sacrifice. She had one chance to change the outcome. She reached into a side pouch of the bomb suit and pulled out her last piece of specialized equipment, a small, high-density fragmentation grenade, a Polish-issue RGO-88, provided by Kowalski for emergencies. She placed the grenade directly on top of the exposed IED pressure plate. She then pulled a length of thick utility rope, wrapped one end around the grenade's pull ring and the other around the largest, heaviest stone she could find, a 7-pound chunk of granite the size of a football. The plan was insane, simple and terrifying. Manually detonate the fragmentation grenade, hoping the resulting blast wave and metal fragments would either neutralize the fusing mechanism of the artillery shells or, better yet, sever the main blasting cap wires, causing a dud. But the resulting explosion would be massive at close range. She needed to initiate the sequence and get clear in under 5 seconds. She gave a final desperate command into the radio, even though she knew her life was forfeit. "Miller, Kowalski, pull back now. I'm initiating localized detonation. Everyone 50 meters out. Now." Chen scrambled backward, fighting the weight of the suit, kicking up dust. She reached the end of the rope, a scant 8 meters. She threw the heavy granite weight with all her strength toward a nearby ditch. The grenade pin was pulled. 4 seconds. 3. Chen pressed herself flat against the ground, tucking her head against her chest, bracing for the worst. She had done everything she could. Crump! The RGO-88 grenade detonated. The sound was sharp, concussive, and immediate. It was not enough to kill, but the sound wave inside the confines of the wadi was astronomical. The blast wave hit the exposed IED setup. A fraction of a second later, the air was filled with a horrific screeching sound, the shrapnel from the grenade tearing into the metal casings of the 150 BFIN shells. The IED did not detonate completely. Instead of a catastrophic explosion, there was a violent, contained whoomp, a partial low-order detonation. The blast cap of one shell cooked off, but the main charge was neutralized, scattered, and smothered by the grenade's blast force. The resulting shockwave, though survivable, slammed into Chen. Her helmet exploded inward from the side pressure, the impact cracking the reinforced visor and slamming her head hard into the wadi floor. She felt the searing heat as the primary shell shrapnel missed her by inches. embedding itself into the surrounding earth. When the dust settled, she was lying in absolute silence, her ears ringing with a sound like 1,000 angry wasps. Her jaw was throbbing, blood flowing freely from a deep laceration where a shard of shrapnel had torn through the thin skin between her helmet seal and her collar. She forced herself up, spitting out blood and debris. The IED position was a smoking crater. The mission was saved. Miller and Kowalski reached her 30 seconds later. Kowalski, the usually stoic Grom major, ripped the remaining pieces of her fractured helmet off her head, his face a mask of awe and horror. "Chen! You crazy son of a bitch!" Miller yelled, rushing toward her. Chen could only see the concern and the immediate medical response in their movements. Reyes had survived. Quan, thanks to the sniper fire being suppressed by Kowalski, was being stabilized. But the moment of reckoning came later back at the FOB. The medical report detailed the blast trauma, the internal concussive injuries, and the extensive superficial damage. The Joint Command assessment was immediate and clear. Specialist Chen had, by knowingly sacrificing herself and violating every safety SOP, saved the lives of 7 Allied coalition soldiers and the entire mission objective. Weeks later, the citation came through. It wasn't the American Silver Star she had expected. It was the Polish decoration, signed personally by the highest military authorities in Warsaw, delivered by Kowalski himself in a quiet ceremony under the dim floodlights of the FOB hangar. The Krzyż Waleczny, for an act of valor above and beyond the call of duty, performed in the face of direct enemy engagement and certain death. It was that sacrifice, that absolute commitment to mission effectiveness over self-preservation, that Morrison, the man denying her a $5 mop head, had just dismissed as the work of a coffee girl. The Gathering Storm, Act 3, The Intervention. Chen reached the end of the hall near the main staircase and found a maintenance closet. She opened the door, inhaling the cleaner air of bleach and stored cleaning chemicals. She pulled off the worn rubber gloves, revealing hands that were calloused not from scrubbing floors, but from handling blasting caps and high-powered rifles. She reached up to the back of her collar, where a tiny, tarnished bronze pin was attached, the physical representation of the Cross of Valor. It was smaller than a dime, purposefully faded and strategically positioned so that it looked like a bit of brass from an old uniform button. It was her penance, her reminder of the cost of that day, and the reason she had requested the lowest administrative assignment possible upon returning stateside, a mandated quiet break from the high-stress environment, a kind of psychological decompression disguised as custodial duty. She was not just a custodian, she was highly specialized personnel ordered to remain unseen, operating on the fringes while her body and mind healed. As she stepped out of the closet, adjusting her stance, a new sound cut through the background hum. It was a precise, rhythmic thud of expensive leather hitting polished linoleum. Not the shuffling of a sergeant's uniform, but the confident, measured pace of a man who moved with purpose and lethal economy. The figure rounding the corner was immediately recognizable, even to those who had never seen combat. He was tall, powerfully built, moving with the quiet grace of a predator. He wore standard U.S. Navy fatigues, but they were cut and worn with subtle customizations. The cuffs slightly tighter, the collar stiffer. His boots were lower, meticulously cared for, and his vest carrier, though empty of plates, was perfectly fitted. This was Master Chief Petty Officer, MCPO Thorne. Thorne was a legend whispered in the shadows. SEAL Team 6, Tier 1 direct action operator, a man responsible for neutralizing global threats whose existence the public would never know. He was known for his icy calm and his almost uncanny ability to assess any situation, physical or psychological, in an instant. He carried a single rifle slung across his chest, not a standard M4, but a heavy, precise HK MR762, customized with a distinctive bronze-colored optic mount and a carbon fiber barrel shroud. It was clearly his personal weapon, maintained to perfection, the ultimate symbol of his craft. Thorne was heading directly toward the supply office. He paused exactly 3 feet from Chen. He didn't smile, nor did he frown. His eyes, the color of storm-churned slate, scanned her face, her body language, and finally, the worn uniform she wore. "Corporal," Thorne said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, devoid of inflection. It was not a question or a greeting, simply a statement of her presence. Chen offered a curt, formal nod. "Master Chief?" Thorne then glanced at the service cart. He looked specifically at the worn, useless mop head dangling from the bucket. Then his eyes drifted back to her, settling, with chilling precision, on the tiny, tarnished bronze pin nestled against the collarbone. His demeanor shifted, becoming infinitesimally colder, sharper. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you heading into requisition supplies, Corporal?" Thorne asked. "I was, Master Chief. I was informed by Sergeant Morrison that the required replacement material is out of stock." Thorne nodded once, slowly. He made a tight, controlled movement with his right hand, adjusting the grip on his rifle. "I require access to the secured logistics server files, Corporal. I have an expedited request for specialized ammunition that cannot be processed without the immediate physical presence of the duty NCO. Sergeant Morrison is on duty, Master Chief. He just denied my request. I observed his disposition toward you through the window, Corporal. He appears to be prioritizing administrative paperwork above necessary personnel support." Thorne turned, his large frame filling the doorway to Building 702. Chen followed him, pushing her squeaking cart, feeling the sudden tension of the environment ratchet up. Morrison, now sorting through a stack of invoices, looked up with annoyance at the interruption. His expression softened slightly when he saw the rank, Master Chief Petty Officer, and the unmistakable, intimidating presence of a Tier 1 operator. "Master Chief, apologies. Didn't hear you approach. What can logistics do for naval special warfare today?" Morrison beamed, suddenly oozing obsequious professionalism. Thorne stood at the counter, his massive hands resting lightly on the laminate. The buttstock of the MR-762 jutted slightly past his hip, its presence dominating the small office space. "Sergeant Morrison, I require access to your secure terminals, specifically the Master Manifest for High-Priority Ordnance Release. I have an authorization code for 50,000 rounds of M118LR, pending immediate transfer to a secured theater location." Morrison's eyes widened slightly. That kind of request was massive, urgent, and usually associated with immediate deployment of the highest-level assets. "Yes, sir. Absolutely, Master Chief. Let me just log you in. I need your—" Thorne cut him off, his voice dropping slightly, laced with an undetectable threat. "First, Sergeant, we have a minor issue of operational support to resolve." Thorne gestured not with his hand, but with a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his chin toward Corporal Chen, who stood quietly behind him, leaning on her mop cart. Morrison's face clouded over again. "Her? Sir, that's just Chen. She needs a new mop head. We're out of stock, pending Q1 reallocation." "Out of stock," Thorne repeated, the words hanging in the air, weighted with judgment. "Yes, sir. Logistical reality, I'm afraid. She can file a paper request. It will be addressed in due course," Morrison finished, his confidence returning now that the topic was merely a mop. Thorne leaned closer to the counter, his eyes fixed on Morrison. "Sergeant, let me clarify something for you regarding priority and logistical reality." Morrison fidgeted under the intense, unblinking scrutiny. The tension was now palpable. The two clerks in the cubicles had stopped typing and were pretending to organize filing cabinets. Thorne spoke slowly, deliberately, his voice maintaining its low pitch, ensuring every word resonated only in the immediate vicinity. "This Corporal Chen, requested a replacement utility item necessary to maintain the mandated integrity of this facility. You denied her, citing fictional inventory depletion, and then dismissed her with a derogatory colloquialism, suggesting her function is beneath your notice." Morrison started to sweat, a cold sheen developing on his brow. "Master Chief, with all due respect, I didn't mean anything—" "Silence, Sergeant," Thorne commanded, the word cutting through the air like a laser. Morrison instantly clamped his mouth shut. Thorne did not look at Chen. Instead, he reached into an internal pocket of his vest and pulled out a small encrypted datapad. He activated it with a thumbprint. The screen glowed softly with white text against a black background. "I am highly familiar with operational personnel files, Sergeant. Standard protocol for high-risk joint force operators dictates that we maintain an awareness of the capability level of all supporting personnel, even those temporarily assigned to non-traditional duties." Thorne's gaze dropped to the small, tarnished pin on Chen's collar. "You called her Coffee Girl. You saw a cleaner. I see a specialist who required a deep administrative separation from active deployment following severe operational trauma. Trauma incurred while demonstrating a caliber of commitment to mission success that you, Sergeant, would not possess the stomach to witness." Thorne looked back at Morrison, his expression granite hard. "Let me read you a citation, Sergeant. An actual citation, not some fabricated excuse for denied hardware." He scrolled on the datapad, and the silence in Building 702 became absolute. The only sound was the low, electric hum of the ventilation system. "Citations for Corporal Chen, currently designated utility maintenance. Firstly, the Joint Service Commendation Medal with V device allows for valorous achievement while serving as EOD team leader, neutralizing a complex pressure plate IED network under hostile suppression fire in the Coast Province 2017. Morrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. His polished exterior was cracking, revealing the panic underneath. Thorne continued, his voice gaining resonance, pushing the details into Morrison's face. "Secondly, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for the development of a rapid deployment field solution for acoustic mapping during search and recovery operations in the Gulf of Aden. Efficiency increase 40%. Thorne paused, allowing the weight of those awards to sink in. He then scrolled to the final, most important entry. His eyes seemed to bore through Morrison's chest. "And finally, the citation you should be paying attention to, Sergeant, as it directly pertains to her current state of administrative isolation." He read slowly, methodically, articulating every syllable of the foreign honor. "The Krzyż Waleczny, or Polish Cross of Valor, awarded by the Republic of Poland, specifically authorized for coalition forces demonstrating exceptional bravery and self-sacrifice." Thorne leaned further over the counter, placing his large hands flat on the laminate, trapping Morrison behind the desk. "This decoration was awarded to Specialist Chen during Operation Gryphon's Eye in Afghanistan. It was earned by manually overriding the detonation sequence of a triple-stacked 155mm IED after the device had been armed by external blast force, and neutralizing the explosion radius at point-blank range using a secondary fragmentation device. Her actions saved the lives of 4 U.S. Special Forces personnel and 3 Polish GROM operators. She sustained severe blast trauma, internal injuries, and a permanent ocular hemorrhage, injuries that required her immediate and sustained removal from combat theater. Thorne lifted his head, finally breaking the stare. "The mop she carries, Sergeant, is her medical profile, a mandated low-stress assignment until her psychological evaluation allows for her return to Tier 1 support. She is not a coffee girl. She's a decorated EOD technician with an active combat clearance that supersedes your entire logistical manifest." Morrison was utterly white. The sweat was no longer cold. It was pouring down his temples. His starched collar suddenly seemed too tight. I was unaware of her prior operational history, Master Chief. I apologize. I can retrieve the mop head from the reserve stores immediately." Morrison stammered, reaching frantically for the phone, trying to regain control of the situation. "You will not," Thorne stated simply. Morrison froze. "You will go to your reserve stores, Sergeant, and you will bring her the best replacement material available. Then you will personally stock her utility cart with every single cleaning agent, disinfectant, and specialized polymer she requires for the next fiscal year. You will do this silently, and you will treat her with the respect due to a combat hero." Thorn stepped back, then turned fully toward Chen. He reached up, unhooking the heavy MR762 rifle from its sling. The weapon, perfectly maintained, felt heavy and cold in his hands. The sound of the sling metal clinking against the rifle receiver was the loudest sound in the office. This was not a common service rifle. It was the tool of his trade, his life extension, the weapon he had carried across 5 continents. To surrender it was an act of complete and total trust, a warrior's ultimate salute. He held the rifle out horizontally, presenting it to Corporal Chen. "Corporal," Thorn said, his voice now softened by a profound respect that was almost reverence. "My team is currently prepping for a hot deployment. We may not return to this base. This rifle has been calibrated for optimal performance. It is zeroed. Its chamber is clean." Chen's eyes, which had remained entirely neutral throughout the confrontation, finally showed a flicker of emotion, a combination of surprise and deep, profound understanding. Thorn continued, "My logistical request for the M118LR rounds is legitimate. I need to ensure they are released today. But first, I need to know they are going to a worthy cause, not being diverted by bureaucratic incompetence." He pushed the rifle slightly further toward her. "CPL, Chen, I know who you are. I know what you gave. The fact that you are sweeping floors to protect your own sanity is a sacrifice that no logistics sergeant could ever understand. Take this rifle. Hold it. When your time is done here, when you feel the dust shake off your boots, you return this weapon, and you tell me where you're going. We need EOD talent like yours. Until then, consider this a formal offering of respect from the sharp end of the spear." Chen's rubber-gloved hands reached out, slowly, carefully, and accepted the heavy, warm metal of the rifle. The weight was familiar, comforting, the weight of duty, not the weight of the mop. She held the rifle for a long moment, the scent of gun oil and brass filling her nostrils, a fragrance far cleaner than the office air. She met Thorn's eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible nod passing between them, a recognition that bypassed rank and bureaucracy. She looked down at the rifle, then back up at Morrison, who was frozen behind the counter, shaking. "Thank you, Master Chief," Chen said, her voice surprisingly strong. Thorn turned his attention back to Morrison, who was now barely standing. "Sergeant, now that you understand the level of clearance of the personnel you just insulted, please provide me with immediate access to your secure server. I need to confirm that my ordnance request has not been internally flagged or rerouted by your Q4 inventory discrepancies." Morrison stammered, "Yes, sir. The login is right here. I'll punch it in for you." "No," Thorn said, pulling back the datapad. "You are currently too stressed to accurately input high-level secure credentials. Corporal Chen, if you would be so kind. Since you are tasked with cleaning this area, I believe you are intimately familiar with the layout. Could you please access the terminal for the Master Chief?" Chen, still holding the MR762 across her chest, the cleaning cart parked beside her, stepped up to the terminal adjacent to Morrison's desk. Morrison, terrified into submission, nodded weakly. "The password is... it's caps lock, 4 numbers, then the symbol." Chen ignored Morrison, her eyes fixed on the blank black terminal screen. She sat down, the stiffness leaving her body as she moved toward a genuine mission parameter. She gently placed the rifle on the floor beside her, a placement that was both respectful and ready. She peeled off her rubber gloves, revealing her surprisingly nimble, scarred hands. She placed her fingertips onto the keyboard. She didn't touch the keys. She touched the biometric scanner built into the lower edge of the monitor, a scanner Morrison had never been trained to use, reserved only for high-tier system administrators and operational auditors. The screen did not ask for a password. It flashed green instantly. "Access granted, System Administrator Audit Mode." The main operational database interface materialized on the screen, a matrix of green and blue text, incomprehensible to anyone without high-level cybersecurity training. Morrison gaped. How did you bypass the primary authentication?" Chen did not answer him. She didn't look at him. Her focus was entirely on the screen. She began typing, her fingers flying across the keys with an impossible speed and accuracy. The rhythm of the keyboard was rapid, mechanical, and deadly. "Master Chief," Chen spoke, her voice devoid of the subservience Morrison demanded, now carrying the clipped technical authority of a systems engineer. "The M118 LR request is still pending approval. It was flagged with a low-priority deviation code set by the duty officer at 700 this morning, approximately 3 hours before my mophead request." Thorne raised an eyebrow, a slight smile touching the corner of his mouth. "I see. And who was the duty officer at 0700? Chen typed a query that flashed through hundreds of encrypted files in a second. "The duty officer was Sergeant Elmer Morrison. You flagged my ordnance request as low priority, Sergeant, and then blamed the delay on inventory shortages." Morrison stumbled backward, hitting the steel shelving behind him with a crash. "That's classified. That's an internal system file. You don't have the clearance for that." Chen leaned forward, her face reflecting in the glow of the screen. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and utterly unforgiving. "Sergeant Morrison," she said, her voice a low, terrifying monotone. "When they mandate a cleaner to walk the hallways of the highest security logistics hub, they don't choose a civilian hire, they choose a ghost." She navigated rapidly to a deeply embedded system management tab. The header of the file read, "Personnel Security Clearance Management." "I was not here for psychological rest, Sergeant. I was here on a specific administrative audit detail, acting as a deep cover systems auditor, tasked with monitoring internal logistical corruption, diversion of assets, and systemic incompetence." She hit 3 final keys. The screen flashed bright crimson. "The Admiral did not ask me to fetch his files. The Admiral gave me the keys to the kingdom." Chen pointed to the bottom of the screen, where a new line of text scrolled out. "Audit finding, System Misconduct Level 4. Unauthorized manipulation of operational priorities for personal gain, neglect of duty." She typed a final command, the word "revoke," flashing prominently on the screen. "The Krzyż Walecznych teaches us that the mission always comes before the self, Sergeant. Your mission was to support the forces protecting this country. You chose to support your own ego and convenience." The screen displayed a final chilling confirmation message. "Security clearance for Elmer Morrison. Logistics NCO revoked. Immediate dismissal pending full investigation." Chen stood up, pushing the chair back neatly. She picked up Thorne's rifle, holding it loosely but ready. Morrison let out a choked sound, a mixture of disbelief and sheer terror. You can't do that. I need that access. My career." Chen simply adjusted the rifle on her hip and looked at Thorne. "Master Chief, your M118 LR shipment is now the highest priority, green-lit for immediate release. I have rerouted the internal system logs to my secure drive for analysis. The system is clean. You are good to go." Thorne approached Chen, his eyes alight with professional satisfaction. He took the rifle gently from her hands. "Good work, Corporal. You still have the touch." He then glanced at the utterly broken Morrison, who was slumped over his now blank terminal. "Sergeant Morrison," Thorne called out, his voice now carrying the cold, hard certainty of fate. "You denied a hero a mop head. She deleted your career. That, Sergeant, is logistical reality." Thorne nodded once to Chen, turned on his heel, and walked out of Building 702, the heavy thud of his boots echoing rapidly down the hall, taking the critical ordnance request with him. Chen waited until the sound of his footsteps had vanished. She picked up her worn mop cart, adjusted the angle of the useless mop head, and looked at the 2 terrified junior clerks. "The sergeant's administrative files are now sealed. He will be escorted out by MPs within the next hour. In the meantime, the floors are still in violation of sanitary codes." She then turned to the locked supply cage. "I have access to the central manifest now," she said, her voice low. "I believe I'll be taking those mop heads now, and perhaps a new mop cart. The wheels on this one are terrible." And with the digital sound of high-level administrative access confirming her entry, "Corporal Chen, The EOD technician and holder of the Krzyzewalecznik wheeled her cart toward the supply cage, ready to complete her duty, whether that duty was sweeping floors or sweeping corruption. The air in Building 702, for the first time in years, finally smelled a little cleaner.